Watchlist, a rundown of what I've been watching recently and what I've been up to. Again, some more films that didn't quite make my end of year list, and some that didn't come out this year and weren't even eligible. So let's get straight to it, and I'm going to start with a Criterion release of a filmmaker that I know is beloved by many. Had a couple of releases in Criterion this year, and it is Albert Brooks. Now, I'd had Defending Your Life recommended to me. I watched it, thought it was utterly great. But I also watched Lost in America, and Lost in America slightly edges it for me. I think they're both equally great. I think, Albert Brooks' way of using himself as a central character to inject himself and bring a kind of common theme throughout his movies is something that I think works really well for him. Lost in America basically tells a story of a man who works for an advertising agency that gets fired, and rather than get back on the horse, he kind of throws his hands up in the air and decides to sell everything and then go buy the camper van and go travelling around America, living off, the money that their house was worth in the West Coast. It's a noble idea, but he needs his partner to go along with him, his wife, and he kind of bullies her into doing it as well. And that's the setup of the film. I mean, I don't think it's highly original, but the events that happen along there, of which there's one major one, I don't really want to spoil, because I think that's kind of the impetus for the rest of the movie is the fallout of that major event. And we get this lovely play between the two central main characters. We get some great scenes with Albert Brooks and him defying the authority of everybody else around him and kind of trying to find his own place. And when, he's down in his luck, how he portrays that in himself. And just ultimately a really, really fun watch, and the type of film that I think that everybody could watch when they're looking for something to pick me up, because it's not all happy the whole way along, but there's joy in this filmmaking. There's a feeling of warmth that runs through it, because these people, situations and circumstances are ones we can all identify with without necessarily being relating to them, having done them myself. It's kind of what if scenario of what would you do if you're in this situation yourself. So, a terrific release, lovely print. I mean, it has conversations with Albert Brooks, and hearing any filmmaker who's not deeply involved in the filmmaking process talk about their own film, I think is always a real treat. And we get an interview with Julie Haggerty, who plays his wife as well, and what a treat she was in this film as well. I think Lost in America, like I say, great release, another great release from Criterion this year, and shout out for the inside of the disc as well. Some great disc artwork, and then the booklet that goes along the side, a little pamphlet goes inside, has some great artwork as well. Just terrific, and that's Lost in America. Next up is another Criterion release, and this is a film that would have made my top list, but I made this pact to myself that anything that I was given for review wouldn't make the list at the end, and so this didn't make it, but I haven't heard very many other people talk about it. Roger Kirby did a video on it, and I think he was right too, because I think this is a film that should be highlighted, because on the face of it, it is melodrama, and I know that as a genre turns some people off. I mean, the film I'm talking about is Gina Prince Bythewood's Love and Basketball. I think this film filled me full of, again, very positive vibes. It's a very warm film. It's a very honest and truthful film. We have two central performances here in Omar Epps and Sanaa Lathan, who I think are just completely captivating on screen. In fact, I struggle to think why the two of them didn't become massive stars after this. I mean, this is a directorial debut. Gina Prince Bythewood, it's very much a film about her interests, which is very much about basketball. She's a female basketball player, and she has a young woman and a young man who grew up next door to each other in middle to upper class America. So we have a story. Many basketball films, especially about black people in America, are set very much in lower class, and this one very much isn't. They live in a nice neighborhood. They live, go to good schools. They have positive relationships and positive family relationships around them. So all of that's going good. But what they have as connection to each other is this tomboy character played by Sanaa Lathan, who just loves basketball, and then you have this boy who is the popular kid in school, mainly because his father's an NBA basketball player and he's tipped for great things in the future. But these two connect to each other from a very early age on court with the love of basketball, and they have this kind of secret friendship in that he's really popular, she's not. She's very tomboyish. He's got a bit of an angry attitude. The very first scene of the movie shows Quincy pushing her to the ground and causing, a scar on her face, explaining all that away. So there is like a tempestuous but competitive side to both of them that comes out. But what you have is this love story that's full of ups and downs the whole way along. And I think it's not, Nathan, I think it's really interesting because there are a lot of the most famous and beautiful black women from that generation of cinema in America. Gabrielle Union's in this, Tara Banks is in this, but there's a vulnerability and a power that Sanaa Lathan has in this film that I think shines above all of those people. I mean, the other people come across as shallow, she has real depth, and she, like I say, has this vulnerability that you as the viewer can't help but fall in love with her and root for her. And I think there's really where the power of the film comes from, because you really connect with the individual that is there. I adore this film. I absolutely adore it. It kind of swept me along in what is quite a long runtime, split up in basketball terminology into quarters as their life progresses and it goes along, and about how their own circumstances change and how that changes their relationship with each other. Like I say, it is melodramatic. It is very much in that feel. But I'm a sucker for melodrama. I am one of those people that will always wave the flag, bang the drum for melodrama as being something that this is a film. It doesn't always have to be representative of what would happen in real life or happen in my life for it to be meaningful. But I can let that wash over me and say to myself, right, this is a film. It's going to play and toy with my emotions. It's going to give me strong, believable characters and vulnerable characters and people that I'm going to root for and hate at the same time. And that is Love and Basketball. It's also an absolutely terrific disc. I think it's got one of my favourite extras of the year, which is the interview between, Gina Prince Blythewood and some others, and Shel Swoops, who was one of the primary female basketball players in America, incredibly successful, is very famous, but actually her talking about the effect that this film had on her growing up as being representative. And I think this idea of representation has come out quite a lot in the Criterion collection this year, of the importance of representing different stories, different people, not only for the people involved there, but also for the likes of me, to gain a better understanding of people in different circumstances than I grew up in, or different times. And there are some of those things that we've seen a lot as I've grown up because of the types of films and filmmakers that were on TV for ourselves. Like, I can identify with an army captain very, very well, as it turns out, that kind of character, but maybe less so with the middle class black kid in America. So, like I say, Love and Basketball, I've probably talked way too long about it, but a film that I think deserves to be talked about. Next up, I'm going to talk about two films that fit very much in this Technicolor era of films. But when I think of Technicolor, I often think of like blown out Technicolor, oversaturated colours. When I think of something like it's very much in your face. So I talked last time about Paul and Pressburger, so the red shoes, etc., that are very much, there's garish colours. It's the red shoes. They want to bring out the red in that. Ten Commandments, again, very strong colours in it. And these next two films are very much in that Technicolor conversation, but are an awful lot more muted and use more, they're not natural colour. Certainly not in this first one. The second one maybe more so, but anyway. What film am I talking about? First of all, I'm talking about Jean Renoir's The River. And Jean Renoir's The River is basically a Hollywood movie where he basically went to India to film a film by the Ganges. Now, he could have went a couple of different directions with this, but he wanted to film, or he did end up filming, in a story of a young British family, or I say young, there's a British family anyway, with a patriarch who's very much part of the establishment there. They live very well to do. They have a number of daughters, and these daughters are growing up in an environment where there maybe is not the representation of attractive males that fall into their demographic or people that they should be associating with. And there's even adopted daughters that fall into this as well, but that kind of family circle, it's a bit of a strange family circle, and one that is not very typical, which I think gives it some power, but ultimately still is interesting to look at. And into this world there comes in a captain. So a man who's injured in the war, Captain John, and he comes to stay and live with him. And basically, because he is this male, white male, British, attractive, all that kind of stuff, all the women swoon over him of all ages. And it's very much a coming of age tale for all of these people as they form friendships, as the relationships interfere with those friendships, as the parents see what's happening in their family and all the rest of it. And there are events that happen in the film, but they're almost like a side piece. You know, the events kind of run alongside what is the main through part of this film, which is basically much about growing up and about how our situations change. And when we look for role models and we look for people to admire, who are those people around us? I think it's, not be surprised to say, Jean Renoir, Technicolor, it's gorgeous. Absolutely beautiful film from start to finish. I mean, the colours are incredible. I think it's the kind of film that I would relish watching again and again every year, because it's a feast for the eyes as much as anything else, and really get some investigation into, you know, proper relationships between, you know, ages, what's good, what's bad, how older men are around younger girls who are swooning over them, all that kind of stuff. But like I say, all of that's much less important than the central story of itself, which is that, like I say, the coming of age. Again, it's another, this is an absolute stacked disc that's in here. We have a 90-minute documentary, which is by Roberto Rossellini. So he looks at his portrait of India that he did. We have another 73-minute documentary from the BFI National Archive around India with a movie camera. And it has some of the early surviving footage of India around that time. Around the River, a documentary about the production of the river. An introduction, which is 16 minutes, by the Indian director and screenwriter Kumar Shahani. And a travelogue that goes around. It's utterly stacked. And on top of that, you also get a booklet. It's a 2-discer, given that there's so much on it between the extras and otherwise. Again, this will be on a sale somewhere, and if you don't pick it up, I think you're absolutely insane, because even if you're not a fan of the film itself, the documentary and film footage of early India around that time is worth buying alone, especially if you're a fan of Italian cinema, as I know some people are. So that is The River. On top of that, another Technicolor film, and this was talked about by my good friend Solitary Ronan. I'll put a link down to his video that's on this, but this Gate of Hell. And Gate of Hell is by Tenosuke Kinugasa. Not a name that rolled off the tongue. It is out on Criterion, and the Criterion cover I think is really, really beautiful. I think this is a pretty good cover, but this is the Eureka release, and again, it's one of those dual format Blu-ray and DVD releases. Back in the days when we had good solid booklets on every release as well, although I'll say Eureka are quite good at that anyway. But Gate of Hell tells a story of there's a threat on the kingdom or the area that's going along, and a single soldier stands up and fights back an awful lot of the oppressors. And as for the people that fought back the oppressors and fought down the mutiny, they're wanting to be rewarded by the chief or the king or the whatever the head of that village is. And when it comes to our central character, what he wants is this woman. The problem being, this woman that he wants and he desires and he wants that he meets in the battle, is that she's already taken. And she's already taken by somebody else that's in the army. And so this creates an issue with what he wants and desires that maybe is not what she wants and desires, especially considering they're already in a relationship and there's another person in there. and it's a tragedy waiting to happen. Something's got to give in some ways, and I think it's a lovely movie. I think it's beautifully shot. I'd like to say, you know, there's a tragedy waiting to happen because that's what the whole film has been building up towards. But you really get a sense of that vulnerability and that power that a male has. You know, the thing that sits inside an awful lot of male characters, especially those that are maybe not getting the respect that they deserve, but they are given, or what they feel is their right to own something or do it, and they will go to all ends. To hell with the consequences, and to hell with what's going on. Like I say, it's a really muted, beautifully shot film. I think I was surprised how beautiful it was. Especially given the time that it was made. It's 1953. In 1953, so around that time we were seeing, you know, Kurosawa was going to come into his element, but in the later years, but he was going to do that in black and white. This one's very much done in colour, and there's a thing of beauty, I have to say, and one that I think is a really good and interesting representation of those themes that were told by other more famous directors like Mizoguchi. It's almost, you know, sits alongside of Mizoguchi in that the female characters are very much the centre of an awful lot of Mizoguchi films, but they are again under the control and whims of the males around them, and it very much sits alongside those kind of films like that, and yeah, terrific. And the last one I'm going to talk about this week, well, it's a famous movie and one that I hadn't seen before until now, but it's a Nicholas Roeg film, and I talked about Australian cinema in my last watch list, and this one, well, it's probably the most famous Australian film, or certainly one of them, which is Walkabout, the Nicholas Roeg film, which tells the story of, you know, Aboriginal people who, well, sorry, I'll go back. Aboriginal people, when they come of a certain age, go on a walkabout to find themselves where they're only supposed to exist and live off the land for a certain period of time, and if they come back, they'll have made a success of that or otherwise. Now, certainly, David Guptill is in this as the Aboriginal man. It's the role that made him famous and actually gave him a full career out of it. But he is somebody that is a secondary character, because this is based around Jenny Agutter and her brother, who at the start of the movie are driven out in the desert, and it becomes quite clear that the father intends to murder them, and spoiler, is not successful, but they're left out in the middle of the wilderness to fend for themselves and survive. And it's only through meeting David Guptill's character that they start, or that they have a chance of surviving. So how they're going to find food, how they're going to find water. But very much part of this walkabout process is this idea again of finding yourself. A bit like I talked about in Jean Renoir's River. This is very much about finding yourself as a person, as a character, and finding your place in the world. And not just in terms of the bits that support you, food and water, but who you are as a person and the desires and needs that you have as an individual. This takes you right the way up and down the Maslow tree, so to speak, of actuating your dreams and the disappointment that may come with that or otherwise. It's a beautifully shot movie. It's an art piece as much as anything else, but one that is incredibly effective. I think it's really moving. There are a couple of scenes in it which could have been something else. They could have been titillating, or could have been just there for voyeurism, but they aren't. They show an innocence, and they show a feeling of youth, and of how these two people, Jenny Agutter and David Guptill's character, are both very individual characters, but both learning and growing at the same time, and how that ends up and how that goes. I mean, this second sight release is stunning. I mean, who doesn't love the thickest packaging? As usual, inside you get a single disc. Nothing to write home there about, although it has got a lot of great extras, as they always do. So you've got an audio commentary with Luke Roeg, who plays the brother as this goes along, and then lots of interviews that go along that. And then you have 2 books. Now 3 books, sorry. One is the essays that go with that. So, life and time of the film. You have the first draft of the screenplay itself, which, I've got to be honest, I don't know if I'll ever read, but a cool thing to have. And maybe if I do an exploration into Australian cinema like I'm doing, maybe it's something that you do go in and do. And then you have the novel, the Walkabout novel, which again isn't very big, but again would make a nice companion if I was going to do a deep dive into the film itself. So that's my watch list for this week. Again, some common themes that I've kind of hit on in the same period of time. I've been kind of up and down with a lot of different types of films, etc. But ones that I think are really interesting, and people don't need me to recommend Walkabout, but it'll be one that I'd be very glad to hear what other people thought about Walkabout, because it is a thoughtful movie. It's one that will ask a lot of questions. It's one that will generate a lot of different answers, and one that I look forward to hearing what you all thought about that. Okay, so I'll speak to you all soon. I hope you're all keeping well, and 2022 is looking after you as well as it is hopefully me. He says that none of this will go out a couple of days afterwards. Who knows what happens in the future. Speak to you soon. Take care.